Good evening, participants. We welcome you for one more week and an exciting journey we have started to build our capacities in cyber crime investigation. Today, we are going to have a topic of digital forensics, the role of first responders, and effective search and seizure. We are very fortunate to have a very experienced person in the domain of digital forensics. Perhaps I came to know that he's one of the expert uh, internationally, Dr. Gaurav Gupta, scientist E from Ministry of Electronics and IT. We welcome you, Dr. Gupta, for today's session. And in order to have the session formally, I request Dr. Atul Kumar Pandey, Associate Professor, Head of Cybercrime Division and Department of NLU Bhopal. Sir, the web stage belongs to you. I request you to do a formal introduction of Dr. Gupta. Thank you.
Very good evening to one and all, and thank you, sir, for your introduction. Today, we have a very distinguished speaker with us, Dr. Gaurav Gupta. Dr. Gaurav Gupta is working as scientist E in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. He has earlier worked as assistant professor in the First Institute of Information Technology, Delhi. He received his PhD in computer science and engineering from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. His research interests include development of efficient and effective solutions in the domain of digital forensics, including digitized document frauds, document integrity establishment. And he has done a very great work in this field. He has received Young Scientist Award of Indian Science Congress 2010 from former President of India, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Azad, sir. With this brief introduction, I would like to invite Dr. Gaurav Gupta. And before that, I would like to thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation on a very short notice and being with us this evening. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, participants. I'm fortunate that I am getting the opportunity to discuss and share my experience with you. Today's topic is very interesting and very foundational because when we talk about digital forensics, apart from what happens inside the forensic labs where actual digital forensic investigation takes place, the success of digital forensic investigation actually depends on what has been done before the evidences and the questioned and subject devices has been brought to the forensic lab. So before they reach to the lab and when an incident has taken place, in between what happens is very, very important, very crucial, where somebody who has spotted the incident, who has found out that something is going wrong, works as a first responder. And how does he do and what all he does determines whether the artifacts and the evidences will stand in court of law or not. So role of first responder from that point, from that perspective is very, very important. Also, when there is a search and seizure taking place by law enforcement agencies, there are a lot of small things which can be taken care, which can help digital forensic investigation admissible in court of law, which can help forensic scientists carry out digital forensic investigation in very, very effective manner. And if we lack there, if we miss certain things, it will either derail the investigation or it will increase the time taken by the forensic labs to actually get that evidences. A very long time will be taken. At times, cases may not be completed. So, role of first responder and effective search and seizure is paramount when we talk about digital forensic investigation, and that is what we will discuss. But before we even reach to role of first responder, we need to understand how a security incident takes place and what are the important aspects of the security incidents or a computer fraud or a cyber crime, which needs to be understood from the point of view of first responder and from the point of view of a search and seizure. So that is what I will take you through in today's session. Okay, so I will be discussing about incident response, which means a person who is going to witness the incident for the first time and how he is going to do the response, what all he is supposed to do, how we need to plan, and how organizations need to plan about incident response, which will lead to digital forensic investigation. So that is one which we will discuss. We'll discuss about generic computer frauds and cybercrime because that is the basis. where incident response, first responder, and search and seizure has to be taken out. So these, along with the roles and responsibilities of first responder and how people have done search and seizure in past and what mistakes they have done and how to rectify those mistakes, these will be the focal points of today's talk. We all know computer frauds and cyber crimes requires digital forensic investigation, and that is where the role of first responder crops up. Computer frauds and cyber crimes are involving a lot of technologies, and it also has human element to it. So when we talk about a crime scene, there is no crime scene in case of a computer fraud and cyber crime. The crime scene could be very, very big. It might be involving multiple locations, multiple geographies, and those are the things which are important when we talk about how to do search and seizure and how to plan for first responder. A quick background, quick recap of what is forensics. Forensics, most of us know. What is computer fraud also we know. So when we talk about forensics, the reason we do digital forensics or forensics is that we apply scientific techniques to detect and fix a crime. So detect and fix is very, very important because at times people have misconception and but more can be done into digital forensics. So in case of forensics, the first thing we need to do is to establish whether a crime has happened or not. It may so happen in some of the cases crime might not happened, but still people think there is a crime. For example, let's say one person is drunk and he withdraws money from the ATM machine. In the morning, he forgets that he has withdrawn money, and he may go and file a complaint saying that, okay, somebody has withdrawn fraudulently money from my ATM because he has forgotten. So in that case, the first thing which needs to be done is to detect whether the crime has happened or it is that person has forgotten or something has gone accidentally wrong, but it is not the crime. So first, once we are sure that a crime has happened, then we need to find out who might be that person. We have to fix. Fix means here link. We have to link the person who has done the crime, including the machines through which the help has been taken to carry out that crime. So when we are linking the crime, that's where the evidences and the requirement of first responder and search and seizure comes into play. So this is the broad definition of forensic science, that application of scientific techniques to detect and fix a crime. We may also define it reconstruction of sequence of events of past. Reason is that it's like something might have gone wrong and we are doing the postmortem analysis of forensic investigation, which means that something which has happened which we are not sure who did it and how he did it. So we try to find out the answers to the W family questions, that what might have happened, who might have done it, why he has done it, and these will be done through finding out artifacts. And if we find out those artifacts and we put those artifacts in a timeline, that means the important part is reconstruction of sequence of event of past. So we have found out some events. We are now reconstructing those events by putting them in order of timeline. Because if we do not put them in order of timeline, then the implications or the results might differ. So when we are able to put all the sequence of event of past in correct order of time, then only we get the evidences. So digital forensics is nothing more but application of computer science. So here what happens is when we talk about computer frauds and cyber crimes, here also we use computer science principles, foundational computer science principles. We use algorithms which are, let's say, image processing algorithm for identifying a mock photograph, for detecting a video tampering. When we talk about, let's say, a crime which is cyber crime, which is interconnected computers where somebody has hacked, then we rely on logs which are being logged by various operating systems and various tools, let's say firewall, a router, or servers. So the idea is when we are talking about computer frauds and cyber crimes, we must rely on foundational computer science principles, foundational computer science algorithms, and tools and techniques and principles of computer science, which we can apply to gather admissible digital evidence for investigating computer frauds and cyber crimes. So, as I discussed last time also, the current trend is we are seeing 2-3 kinds of crimes. One is people are using digital technology in doing conventional crimes, and there are some new forms of crime. So for example, a document fraud where I'm printing a counterfeit document by scanning an original document by tampering it, by editing it, and then printing it. And this is important, when we talk about, let's say, if somebody is making a counterfeit document, role of first responder will come into play. Reason is, when you are investigating a fraud, which is about, let's say, computer fraud, which is about document fraud, most of us only talk about computing device, and most of us only sees the computing device for investigation. Whereas in case of a document fraud, a printer might also be important. A scanner which is there at the crime scene may also be having relevant evidences which can be used to detect and link that particular piece of counterfeit document which has been generated to that particular piece of printer or a particular piece of scanner. So it is not that scanners and printers may or may not have evidentiary value. It depends on type of crime which has happened. So when we talk about conventional crimes, we might find evidences in peripheral devices also. But when we talk about modern day computer frauds and cyber crimes, let's say ATM frauds or hacking of a computer or sending, morphing something into the, let's say, morphed images, there the evidences are primarily into the storage medium of the hard drive. But then those hard drive could also be, we will see when we talk about search and seizure, that criminal also, play tricks in order to make sure that you are not able to find out the correct storage media or the correct storage device which is containing the evidences. And cyber terrorism, which everyone knows, where terrorists are using computing devices for carrying out terrorism activity. There also evidences are scattered all over the place across geographical boundaries, including international boundaries. So let's now understand the anatomy of computer fraud. Whenever we do analysis of something, we try to understand the anatomy of that particular subject. So here, when we are talking about anatomy of computer frauds and cybercrime, which will also help in reconstruction of sequence of event. So we need to understand, these are the four major, heads which define the anatomy of computer fraud and cybercrime. For any crime to happen, there has to be some kind of motivation. So is the case with computer frauds and cybercrimes. Here also, there are so many motivations which a person may have to carry out computer fraud and cybercrime. There are entities involved. This probably will help us in terms of evidences, because when a computer fraud and cybercrime is happening, what all entities are involved is very important, because those are the sources of evidence for us. Then events, any event taking place could be malicious or non-malicious. Malicious events are the ones which are causing computer fraud and cybercrime to happen, and malicious events are the ones which are interesting and are of interest to law enforcement agencies and the investigative agencies. And in relation to that, first responder and search and seizure guidelines has to be developed, and accordingly those guidelines has to be acted upon. And then finally, in the anatomy of computer fraud and cybercrime, there are some impacts, and we will go in detail all these four components and understand what are those things which constitute these components. So motivation is most important part. Without motivation, nobody will do anything, especially criminals will not do anything. So most obvious motivation is money, which is also here, for like any crime, people do computer frauds and cybercrime to gain money, starting from counterfeiting of document, where they make, all sort of document to make money, including currency, including, let's say, counterfeit certificates to get a fake job, and to make, counterfeit, registration certificates of the vehicle, to sell the stolen cars, to make, counterfeit driving licenses, where somebody does not have a license, they take money and make a counterfeit driving license. So money is most important. ATM fraud, people want to take out money, skimming, cloning of cards. Most of the crimes, 70 to 80% of the crime, especially cyber crimes, are for money. Next category comes where people want to take revenge. I want to implicate someone else. I have enmity with somebody. So now what I do is I try to do something which is malicious, and I try to plant evidences in a way so that instead of me, the evidences point towards them, so that I can implicate someone else. So I'm trying to take revenge, right? So this is one more category. Terrorism is self-explanatory. I don't have to explain. So this is one of the motivation, which is like any other crime. In conventional crime also, when we were not having computer frauds and cyber crimes, then also these motivations were there. People were doing crime for money, for revenge, for terrorism. But there are certain new motivations which did not exist earlier, and that will also help again plan how do we respond to the incidents, and these motivations are important to understand. So something known as intellectual satisfaction or adventure in some cases, or like sense of feel of achievement. So a teenager hacking NASA computer, or a very young boy trying to show their friends that how can he reset password of their account, or how can he send a spoof email, how can he do something which others can't do on a mobile phone. So this is something new, a teenager doing it for fun, whereas they don't know when the boundary of law has been crossed, is something which is new, mostly because of computer fraud and cybercrime. So that time, at times it becomes difficult for a school kid or a teenager boy or girl, doing some trick and thinking that it is harmless trick, but in the eyes of the law, at times it might be a crime. So intellectual satisfaction, adventure in some cases, or sense of feel of achievement is something which is new and unique to computer frauds and cybercrimes, and it is happening. And there are cases where people have done these kind of activities without knowing whether they are doing crime or not. I think infancy of digital forensics and IT laws is also partly responsible. Reason is many criminals know that some of the crimes are not covered by the law, and hence they do it. So let's take old example. Before IT Act 2000 came into picture, before that also we were using internet. So we used to use those dial-up connections which had username, password. But let's say if before IT Act 2000 came into existence, before that, if somebody wanted to file a complaint that somebody has used my internet time because he knew my username and password, it was probably not reportable so easily because it was not covered. The IT Act was not there. It could probably come in cheating, but there also, how do you prove that somebody has stolen your time? So laws catch up as the frauds happen, and many times there are gray areas which are not covered by the law, as well as there are instances where although laws were there, but search and seizure and first responder has not done his job thoroughly, and hence the cases has gone for a toss, and people mistook that as that digital forensic is not something which is very serious. You can always get away without after doing a computer fraud and cybercrime, and it's very difficult for somebody to catch hold of you. It is partly also because of the nature of digital technology. Because digital technology is faceless. The internet and the cyber world gives you a illusion that nobody is seeing you. You are in some corner of the world. You can connect to any part of the world. So it's a boundaryless, faceless, anonymous word for most of us. Most people believe that it is very, very difficult to track them. It is very easy for them to disguise and masquerade or spoof. So that illusion, when they are not doing crime physically, so that they have less guilt. It's like if I have to murder somebody by stabbing or by gun, I will feel little bad and little more guilty because I see blood, I see person crying, I can feel the pain of the person at times. So that gives me little more guilt compared to if I hack into an hospital management system and change the dose of the medicine and the person dies, which I'm not seeing that he's dying in front of my eyes. So it is less guilt method. So when we talk about computer frauds and cybercrime, one very important point which we must understand and keep in mind is that cybercrime and computer frauds, the criminals feel that they are anonymous, nobody can see them, they feel less guilt, they feel less connected. They also feel that this is low risk, high gain method, which means they don't have to invest a lot. They don't have to have lot of arms and ammunition. They don't have to have a big team to accompany them to do a fraud. Here you only require an internet and a laptop or a desktop, and some skills of how to use tools and how to go about exploiting the vulnerabilities and the innocent users. So they feel this is low risk, high gain method. So that's where more and more people are trying to do computer frauds and cybercrime. So as we are seeing during the pandemic also, computer frauds and cybercrimes have increased. Reason is now technology is very, very affordable. bandwidth is very good. 4G connectivity at a very economical rate has fueled adoption of smartphones which are having high-speed internets, and that's where more users are connected to the computer and internet, which means if a criminal has to do a computer fraud and cybercrime, he has more number of targets available to them who can be exploited. So technology itself is fueling the growth of computer fraud and cybercrime, and because of the motivations which we just discussed, that people feel anonymous, people feel more safe, people feel that they will not be caught, people also feel that even if they are caught, cases will go on for years, because understanding and preparation and preparedness of digital forensic professional is not what it should be. And that is where I think this course is very useful, and that the course has been planned by Ministry of Electronics, that more people should be made aware, so that investigation can be done faster, investigation can be done in a manner, so that it reduces overall investigation time. First responders and search and seizure can be done effectively, again to make sure that the overall digital forensic investigation life cycle is shortened, and the evidences are more admissible and more effective, and that is the idea of this course. So these motivations are important to understand, because they will give us some of the clues that how to go about responding to them. Crime scene and entities. When something has gone wrong because of an event which is malicious, and we will discuss events in the next slide. But before that, let's say something has gone wrong, who all could be involved in this? So what all entities are involved when something has gone wrong? So the entities which are involved is source, target, intermediate, and intermediary. So let's say if you are investigating a particular crime scene, or a particular person, or a particular device, that could be source, or that could be a target, or that could be in between. That could be used. It's like botnets, right? Botnets are like a network of computers. So let's say if I am a bot master, what I will do is I will compromise hundreds of computers and make them my slave, and I will instruct them to do what I want them to do. I will use their computing power, I will use their bandwidth, I will use the resources of that computer, and they will serve as the slave of the command and control center which I am having in my computer. Now what happens is, in that case, those bots are attacking. Let's say if I want to launch a denial of service attack against a particular website, what I do is I offer these services, and a particular company hires me to attack their rival company. So what I do is I instruct these bots to go and send requests from all over the place, wherever these bots are under my control, to that particular website, so that can be crashed and denial of service can be caused. So in that case, if you happen to investigate a machine which is having a bot, it is neither source nor target, it is basically an intermediate. So it's an intermediate machine which has been compromised by the criminals, and those are the maximum in number. Whereas when you are having a suspect and you actually land up it to his place, the computers and the phones and the computing devices there are probably the source of the attack, source of the crime, and those may have tools, technologies, and methodologies using which the attack is being carried out. So you are likely to get a lot of evidences in those computers. They will also have the compromised material which has been downloaded and stolen from the target machines. Whereas target machines are those where attack has been done. So there you will have probably some tools which has been uploaded, traces of the activities which has been carried out, and logs also further suggesting that which computer and which IPs has connected to them. And hence all these three will contain evidences. But the crime scene here is virtual. Crime scene here is not bounded by a particular space. So it's a very, very big crime scene which could be having multiple instances, multiple servers, multiple countries, and multiple geographies. So we need to understand, when we are talking about search and seizure, what all we need to see is from source, target, and intermediate machines, and identifying them itself could be a task. Right? Again, we will discuss going forward some of the case scenarios where these are important, and we will discuss them. Okay, when we are talking about computer frauds, as we discussed, we have some entities and there was some motivation, but those has been carried out by some event, and the event is malicious event. because there are so many normal events which are also happening. So only the malicious events are of interest to law enforcement agencies. Those are the artifacts generated by the malicious events are the ones which are required by the law enforcement agencies as potential source of evidence. So some of these are not the exhaustive list, but some of the events which are like unauthorized connection. An IP is connecting to a machine which it is not supposed to connect. Let's say if somebody is connecting to me, somebody is pinging me, somebody is trying to find out what kind of operating system, what kind of browser I'm using, what kind of softwares I'm using. Somebody is probing me to gather information about me so that they can launch an attack. An attack could be in form of connecting to me and stealing my data. So stealing, tampering, or destroying, these are some of the events that somebody may do, a criminal may do. He will steal data, he will tamper data, he will destroy data. And while he is doing so, there will be evidences which are being generated. And do you know why the evidences are generated? So there is a famous principle which I'm not mentioned here, which is Locard's principle, Locard's exchange principle, which basically talks about the Locard's principle has two variants, two definitions. I will just tell you the definition. The first definition is every contact leaves a trace. So what it says is that whenever something is coming into contact of an environment, there is an information exchange. So it's like if I'm sitting here and I'm touching this table, so I'm contacting it, I'm leaving a trace, which means I can also reword it. I cannot come into contact of this table without exchanging information in some way, which means I have given my fingerprints onto the table surface and I have taken the material of table surface onto my fingerprints. So if you take both of these things, the source and the target, you will find that I came here because you can get my fingerprints here. You can get the hair components from the the carpet which is there because my one or two hair might have fallen. My shoe print will be here. And what I have taken is, let's say carpet thread will be there in my shoes. The paint of the wall might be there on my fingers and so on. So basically, Locard's principle says that you cannot come into contact of an environment without changing it in some way. And that change which you are having is the source of evidence. The change here is my fingerprint, change here is the paint, change here is the hair, change here is the carpet giving me information, and like that. So basically, whenever an activity is taking place, an event is taking place, this event is making sure there is an information exchange which is taking place between the entities which we have identified. Right. So stealing, tampering, destroying of data, all these activities will generate footprint. They will generate some logs. Somebody is connecting to me through an IP. There will be server logs. There will be logs by the service provider. So for example, let's say if somebody is using his Airtel connection to send, try to attack me, in that case, he will have the evidences against him in his phone. His service provider will know that he was using this IP at that point of time. His service provider will also tell me that the packets traveled from his phone to his service provider, and then to my service provider, and then to my server or a computer. So there is a chain of devices which together will have set of evidences which, if somebody can find out, can be used as admissible evidence in court of law. So that is what we need to understand, that what all are the sources of the evidences, where you need to do search and seizure. Because many times if we don't know about a particular entity where evidence would be there, we will miss it. Like I gave you example, in case of a document fraud, if you only see computer hardware, let's say a CPU and other things, but you don't see printer and a scanner, then it is difficult to prove that this particular printer or scanner has been used in generation of that particular counterfeit document. So understanding the case, understanding the crime scene, understanding the entities involved in a crime is very, very important when we talk about first responder and search and seizure. Next could be, the events could be planting of evidence. As I told, digital data is perfectly replicable. So it's like if I have a file A which contains some data in a pen drive, and if I copy that file in as file B in different pen drive, and if I ask you which is original and which is not original, where I have changed the date and timestamps also in both the files, date and timestamp of creation, modification, and access, I have changed using APIs. I've used a program or a software to connect to the pen drive in both the cases, and just to reset their date and timestamp to same. Now, can somebody tell me, it is very, very difficult to tell which is the original copy and which is a photocopy. Whereas in conventional world, if I had a document and if I do a photocopy, photocopy quality degrades as compared to the original one. And if you do further photocopies, quality will keep on going down. And you can differentiate between the genuine on the original copy and the subsequent copies. But in case of digital world, it's perfectly replicable. You can't tell if I have 1,000 copy of a file, which is original and which is a copy and which is copy of a copy. So planting evidence is easy in that case. You can always tinker with data. Although, as per Locard's principle, there will be evidences of planting of evidence. But again, you must know what we are looking for and how to find out these evidences and where to find these evidences. Right? Again, there are a few more examples like causing of denial of service, initiating terrorist activity. So whatever you do in digital world, you will create some piece of artifact which is waiting to be found, and with a proper search and seizure plan, with a proper understanding of roles of responsibilities of first responder, we can probably initiate it. Impact of a computer fraud and cybercrime is well known. There are far-reaching, irreversible, devastating consequences when computer fraud and cybercrime is done. Starting from loss of money, time, and reputation, which is again was always there in conventional world also. Nothing new about it, that a crime, because of a crime you are losing money, time, and reputation. But denial of service is little more prevalent and more common when we talk about computer frauds and cybercrime. Mental harassment, because people may do stalking, people may do denial of service. These impact, this can be used as a tool for mental harassment. It has impact on economy because today we have millions of computing devices connected to each other. Our economy completely runs on digital technologies. We have power grid which are controlled through digital technology, to stock exchange, to banking system, to the BFSI sector. So you name an industry who is not dependent on today in terms of digital technology. Since they are all dependent on digital technology in a big way, if somebody is able to compromise, then the impact is far-reaching and devastating. Impact is big, and it could have impact on economy also of a country, as well as these are being used as a tool by hostile neighbors as a tool to destabilize the economy of their enemy countries. And terrorists are also using to send secret messages using steganography. So terrorists also use digital world and digital technology big time, because that gives them a lot of power, and as well as anonymity. We have dark web, which is being used big time for terrorism activities, for trading illegally drugs, and for trafficking. So those also require investigation. When we talk about dark web, how to do investigation of a dark web, what to seize, where to seize, who are the people, who are the source and target, how to do surveillance of, to find out targets and sources. When we talk about dark web, that also is something important and needs to be understood from the perspective of search and seizure. So now we'll start, how and what needs to be done as first responder. Who could be a first responder? What are the roles and responsibility of a first responder? So, first is we need to be very cautious when we talk about first responder. When dealing with digital evidence, generic forensic and procedural principles should be applied, which is about the process of collecting, securing, transporting digital evidence should not change the evidence. If there is any change caused by anybody who is handling the evidence or incidents, anything happens there because of their fault or because of their handling, it actually is the biggest help for the criminals, and it is the biggest problem faced by law enforcement agencies and the digital forensic investigation life cycle, because then the evidences can't be used in court of law. So we need to be very cautious about it. Digital evidence should be examined only by trained people, specifically who has been trained specifically for this purpose. Again, and that is where we are talking about first responder in the course, so that people understand that it's not without knowing that you can't handle things, because without knowing if you handle, there will be problems. And everything done during seizure, transportation, storage, or by first responder, everything should be documented very well documented, preserved, and should be made available, because there might be scenarios that you have done something and it is explainable, and if that thing has been documented, it can be used later part in the investigation and in court of law to better understand what has happened and what was done. Right. So a first responder is the guy who first identifies that something is going wrong. It could be an employee of a company. It could be person who is getting impacted. It's like, I got a SMS saying somebody has 10,000 rupees transaction has taken place on my card. In that case, I am the first responder because the account belongs to me. Whereas if I am a network administrator in a firm, in a enterprise, and if I suspect that suddenly traffic has risen, there are particular denial of service attack which is happening from one particular place, or there are certain security parameters which are changing and alerts has been generated, that could be the person who is the first responder. It could be the police personnel where somebody has informed that something wrong is going on, and they reach onto the crime scene and accordingly start acting as first responder. So first responder could be anybody. It is not only LEA or IO. It could be a forensic examiner at times. It could be a general user using the system. So there is no fixed person who is a first responder. Within an organization, I will discuss again going forward that each organization actually must assess how to plan first responding activity in their organization. Because as a individual user, it is difficult. There can only be sensitized. But I think most big organizations, it's like whenever there is a or big organization, they have to have a fire plan, right? So they have first responder guidelines for in case of a fire emergency. So if you go to a building, you will find those charts that will be showing you where you are on the map. So they tell you, okay, within this building, you are at this point, and it will also tell you what to do and what not to do. Like in case of fire, don't take lift. In case of fire, raise alarm. In case of fire, break this glass and press this button. In case of fire, there is a do's and don'ts of first responder in case of fire. Right. So every enterprise, every big building has to have a fire plan, and it has to have some kind of fire drills for the employees, so that they are aware of where to go and escape, what to do and what not to do. Similarly, first responding activity for an organization should be made mandatory, and if it is not mandatory, voluntarily they should take it up. They should make up a first responder plan, and we will discuss what all should be there. So why do we require first responding plan, and why it is important activity? This is important because when we talk about point number 2, like evidences are in different formats. So these evidences, when we talk about digital evidences, unlike conventional evidences, where if you, let's say there is a murder in a conventional world, you can actually seal that particular area. It is 1 room, 2 rooms, or 5 rooms, or a small premise. You can always put that particular premise off for all the people, and you can safeguard it. The evidence is like blood and all the other things inside this conventional crime scene are not going to go away. They do not decay so fast. Their decay is very, very slow. Blood does not vanish in a minute. Whereas when we talk about digital data actually is very, very, as I told, very fragile. It can change, it can be deleted. So if you have to remove 1,000 books from a library, it will take time. It will take few hours. Whereas if you have to delete 1,000 books from a computer, it will only take a single command. So evidences and the digital artifacts, they have a very peculiar nature, which is that they are replicable, they are mutable, they are easily destroyable, and they can change. Their values can change. You can modify things, and it is not visible at times. They are not physical, chemical, and biological in nature. You can't touch and feel them. So these evidences and the artifacts are in different format in digital world. Hence, there are bigger challenges, and at times something might be going under our nose and we might not be aware. For example, let's say if a crime scene is there, and a search party goes there from the law enforcement agencies, and while they are searching, let's say they reach there at 12 o'clock and a computer laptop is there and there are many other devices, and they start seizing, and in next 2 hours they complete the seizure of all the devices. And later on, when the forensic investigation is happening in forensic lab, there are entries that that particular laptop has been accessed at 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. when the search was going on, and nobody from law enforcement agencies has touched it. How could that happen? It happened because somebody had a remote access to that computer through Wi-Fi, and since visibly there is no connection which we can see to the laptop, some people in that particular search and seizure activity of law enforcement party did not bother to secure the place, and the laptop through Wi-Fi was connected by the criminals, and a lot of activity took place. They deleted data, and it became very difficult for law enforcement agencies to explain in court of law why, when you were there, things have changed, why there were updations to the computers, and it is at times very difficult to explain. So idea is we must understand what all can go wrong when we are doing search and seizure, and there are detailed guidelines which we need to draw, specific to organization, specific to each country, and then there are generic guidelines also, and I will come to that in due course of time. So again, devices, when we are talking about when we are talking about first responder, in that case, again, he has to respond to either to source or target or intermediary. He doesn't know what he is. He might be the source where the crime might have happened or initiated. He might be the target or he might be intermediary. Accordingly, he might have to probably understand and do things differently. And as an organization, people have to find out what they could be. So an IT company probably would be the target of an attack, or a bank or a BFSI company would be target of an attack. Whereas companies which are having a lot of computing power but does not have a asset in terms of money probably could be used as bots, that means intermediaries, to carry out the attacks. Right. So as we discussed, that first responder could be anybody starting from LEA, IO, forensic examiner to general user. Each one will have to understand what they do and what they don't do. So the very important thing to note down here is that anybody, whether it's a LEA or an IO or a forensic examiner or a general user, they must preserve the forensic evidence value and also make sure that chain of custody is followed. Chain of custody means here that they have to find out what all they have done, what all they have seen, and they have to label everything, because digital data is fragile. And connections you may not remember, and things might be overwhelming at times, and later on you may not be able to recall what all was there. So they must maintain a chain of custody by documenting everything in detail. Digital data, along with being fragile, mutable, and replicable, which are different words, they are not interchangeable, because replication does not mean mutable, as well as fragile does not mean they are replicable. They are different. They're time sensitive. So certain piece of hardware is retain data only for some time, and after that start to overwrite. It's like in feature phone we used to have call records. After every 10, so my phone, the first feature phone which I had, could record, let's say, 10 calls, and after, when I get the 11th call, my first call detail go away from the mobile phone because it has been overwritten. So these kind of problems also exist when we talk about digital devices, that they may not have unlimited amount of storage. The algorithms and the planning of the working of those devices might have been designed in a way to retain data only up to a point, and after that they will start reusing space, deleting data or overwriting data. So time sensitivity is also one thing which we need to keep in mind when we are talking about being first responder. For example, let's say if first responder finds a phone which is not belonging to an organization, and he suspects that this phone might be used for carrying out a crime in some way or other, there are two things which needs to be done. The first thing which needs to be done is to make sure that there is no communication which reaches to this phone, and second is you need to make sure this phone remains on, switched on. It should not get switched off, because if it gets switched off, a lot of data from the RAM will go away. How do you do this? So if you are a first responder, you are not from search and seizure, you are not from LEA and IO, or you are not from forensic lab, you may not be always equipped to handle such scenario. But you know the objective. The objectives are that you need to make sure nobody is able to connect. This phone should not be able to interact with the outside world, and this phone should remain live. This should not get switched off. These are the two objectives. So when a IO or a forensic guy or a LEA is there, they may be knowing that they need to have a Faraday bag, sure that which restricts all the incoming signal to the phone, and they can put this phone into a Faraday bag. But for a normal user, how do he do it? So very crude way, one person can, let's say if I'm a general user and if I happen to be in a scenario where I have to respond to a phone to preserve, to respond as a first responder and preserve this phone for further forensic investigation, one crude thing I can do is I can wrap it in aluminum foil, which we use for, wrapping our food. Aluminum foil, if you properly wrap aluminum foil to a phone, no signal can penetrate and reach to the phone. And if you wrap it multiple times, you make sure that this phone is now not reachable to any signal, which means there will be no change from this point onwards. Further, how do you ensure? Because if you put a charger to the mobile phone and plug it to the power socket, it will work as an antenna. It will actually carry signal. So for that search and seizure, an LEA and forensic guy use pencil batteries, let's say A2 or A3 battery set, which with a attachment which can be plugged to USB drive or the connector of the phone. So that phone will be kept on charging through these A3s or A2 batteries, and you can now put it into a Faraday bag or an aluminum foil wrap through aluminum foil, so that both the objectives that nobody should be able to contact this phone and this phone should not die, this phone should remain switched on, can be achieved. So you have to understand the objectives and accordingly act on to it. We preferably, when we are talking about computer frauds and cybercrime, we want first responder should be experienced. That means a drill should have been done with the first responders. A plan must have been made by the organizations, and that is something important that organizations do it, so that experienced first responder knows what to do. He has probably access to some of the basic stuff which may be required when he's trying to react to a incident. And if an amateur is collecting evidence, he's likely to do a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes will be very costly. Even though you may get data implicating some criminals, but it may not stand the scrutiny of the law. It may not survive in court of law. So drill and understanding do's and don'ts of first responder and search and seizures are very, very important and must be done. They must not reboot or alter or destroy data that could be useful in investigation. So if you do anything of assuming that you want to do something, let's say they try to find out what's going on computer, they try to log in or they try to switch it off until there is a genuine reason, all these activities should have an algorithmic input that, okay, in this scenario you do this, in this scenario you do that. So let's say if you assume that a computer is being connected remotely and data being changed, then you can probably shut it down by taking battery out rather than by doing a shutdown from a computer or a laptop. So that those things should be very, very clear and documented. Forensic data capture tools often require training, can only be used by forensic guys. So first responder should not become expert and try to do forensic investigation on its own. He should only try to preserve evidence and send it by securing them in a way so that forensic investigation can be done by the experienced professionals. So that is the only duty first responder has to have. He has to find out what to see, what to respond to, and just to make sure that it is preserved well. Nothing else is the part of the duty for first responder. Mishandling of digital evidence should be avoided, like powering off or analyzing, as I just discussed, because those things will create logs that these has been handled by the person who is trying to do something, and any log generated in your name you need to explain, and which is not desirable. Right. So some guidelines. Okay. So before I go further, there are sources. NIST has detailed guidelines on how to do preservation. How what a first responder has to do. Right now, what I'm talking about is generic first responder guidelines. But NIST has, a very exhaustive document, and I will actually show you the NIST document also, which talks about how a first responder has to respond to each kind of device. Let's say there is a pen drive, what he needs to do. If there is a mobile phone, what he needs to do. If it's a hard drive, what he needs to do. What kind of hard drives are there, and for each kind of hard drive, what needs to be done. All these are documented in detail in NIST uh, NIST standard, and that is very, very exhaustive. Idea is from that standard, each organization, each community, including law enforcement community and the forensic community, can draw what all is applicable to them, what all they need to do, and they can probably have a customized search and seizure or customized first responder guidelines for an organization or for a community. I think I will encourage you to, go to the standards. I will also request the LMS portal, coordinators to supply you the documents, and I will be sharing it post session, maybe tomorrow. The knowledge to understand and fine tune for each kind of device, and probably in future also new devices will come, how to and what to do, and develop their own first responder guidelines. Right. So first part is that it says ensure that the officer's safety and safety of other remains highest priority. When you're dealing with any of the artifacts, you should not only ensure the preservance of the evidences, you should also ensure the safety, because at times things might be not safe for you to, there might be scenarios, might be, things where, it might endanger the safety of the people who are engaging into the search and seizing activity. They must recognize the investigative value of digital evidence. They must know that what all could be important. It should not, nothing should be left behind. Access all available resources while trying to preserve and identify what all needs to be seized. Identify the equipment and supplies that could be taken to crime scenes. For example, many times there are certain extra items at the crime scene which are not taken at that point of time, but later on it becomes very difficult for forensic labs to investigate. For example, there is a particular type of charger, and if you seize everything, you don't take the charger with that. So, in forensic lab, they may not have that particular type of charger to connect to, and pending the charger, the investigation will be delayed. Right. So you need to identify what all spare parts or peripheral devices or supplies which are there at the crime scene, which may be used by forensic labs to probably ensure that device and the equipment which has been seized continues to work when it goes to forensic lab, or they can operate using those devices and by those connectors. So everything must be carefully selected and chosen, because in some of the cases were delayed just because the right set of connector was not seized, and buying those old connectors at times is very difficult and they are not available. Assess the crime scene and digital evidence present, which we have discussed. Designate assignments, roles, responsibilities when we have more than one person responding to a particular event. So again, it is from an organization point of view, that within an organization, if there is an incident, the person, there should be guidelines that, okay, all the people up to this point can only raise it to the next level. Only people authorized or experienced, or the people who have been given training for responding to first responders should be identified and called for handling the incident which is ongoing. Not everybody should be able to do it. I think this is a repeat slide. Right. So basically, each organization should make sure that something known as digital forensic readiness. How ready you are for a forensic investigation, how ready you are to respond to a fraud. Because it may so happen, there are cases when an employee, disgruntled employee, leaves an organization and takes away the critical code or the data or the customer base or the database of the customers. And then when investigation is started, it is found that they are not logging certain things, they are not logging who is connecting to their critical server at what point of time, so those logs are not enabled. they are not logging so they don't have a policy onto the laptops and the desktops to prohibit external USB drives to be connected. If somebody is connecting a USB drive, which drive was connected and what files were transferred. Even the logs of only the connection of connecting a USB to the computer was not logged. Files which has been accessed and transferred were not logged. So in that case, investigation becomes difficult. So each organization must assess their digital forensic readiness, and the very easy way to assess what all can go wrong is like you find out what are your assets, what can go wrong with you. For example, in case of an organization, somebody can take away your customer database, somebody can take away your trade secrets, somebody can access your critical data. So all those things should be identified, and then you need to apply policies and you need to apply logging mechanisms. You need to apply your digital forensic readiness processes around those assets, so that in case something goes wrong, the proper logs are enabled, proper recording of events is taking place, which can assist forensic examination later on. So you need to identify what all can go wrong in your organization and in your system, what are your important assets, and then I think some part is repeated here again because I got less time to prepare. So idea was that forensic readiness assessment of an organization or of an entity is most important, and that must be carried out with a frequent interval of time, so that you are fully prepared to handle an incident as and when it takes place, because in digital world, incidents are bound to happen. You may not be knowing some incident might be happening without your knowledge, because you are not logging, because you are not analyzing. At times you are compromised, but you are not even knowing that you are compromised. So idea is, there are only two kinds of companies. I think there is a statement which I read some time back, that there are only two kinds of companies: one who has been hacked, others who have to discover that they have been hacked. So that way, digital technology being faceless, being brutal, and because anybody can connect from anywhere without even our knowledge, there might be incidents which are happening, and if we are not ready for them, they will continue to happen. I will now move on to search and seizure. Search and seizure basically is the domain of law enforcement agencies and forensic examiners. I think recently, a couple of days back, I read in newspaper there were guidelines by the court. I think in the state of Karnataka, some court has passed that people have to have detailed guidelines about search and seizure. Search and seizure basically is the most challenging aspect, most crucial aspect. Anything going wrong here means case goes for a toss. So when we are doing search and seizure, these are some of the important points. When we are talking about collection, we need to while we are searching, we need to recognize what all to collect. Once we have recognized what all to collect, we need to do the collection of those things properly, and then we need to document. And this is the broad thing which most of us know, because this is what we have collected and documented will go for examination. And in case when we are talking about collection and search and seizure, we need to also understand there might be a lot of hidden data, a lot of disguised data, a lot of things which criminals will don't want law enforcement agency to find out, and they will do all sort of things to make sure that you don't reach to those evidentiary value artifacts or the devices, and we need to be very, very clear about that. So this is the complete process of digital forensic investigation, where we have collection, examination, analysis, and reporting. Collection is the stage where we are talking about search and seizure. So search and seizure require a preparation. Preparation means what all you need to have when you are going for a search and seizure. Preparation requires you to understand that you have to secure and document the crime scene, which means you might have to take photographs, sketches, notes, or videos, because today taking a videography is not very difficult and not very costly also. You need to use protective equipments to avoid contaminating crime scenes. It should not happen that you are leaving evidences there and the evidences are being changed because of your handling. So that is also something which is important. We need to recognize and identify evidences. So many times, if some law enforcement agency people who are not trained, they are going for search and seizure, they may not identify some of the devices. Some of the devices are such and they change so fast that not everybody knows about all kind of devices. Some of those things are in disguised form also, and we'll see those things. Right, so document electronic equipment at the crime scene, because there will be a lot of electronic equipments, and all those equipment needs to be documented. Documentation could be either videography or a photography. Collect and preserve electronic evidence, package and transport. This is the overall process that you recognize and identify the evidence, you document all of them, you collect and preserve them, you package and then transport them for further investigation, and this is done through a proper chain of custody. And once that is done, the evidences are delivered to the forensic lab. There the investigation happens. So you need to have a toolkit. So whenever a search party is going, they have to have a camera and video recorder and cellular phones, because those things will be required for making documentation to understand what is connected to whom. Because in a computer, if you see in a desktop, there are 8 to 10 wires going which are connecting to different ports, and at times there could be multiple options for the same thing. So let's say there are USB drives, there are 2 or 3 USB points in front, 3, 4 in the back. So which particular point a particular piece of USB device was connected has to be precise, which means you must preferably be taking videos and photographs of all the electronic devices from all the angles, from front and back, and then do the documentation. Again, like just the example is that one of the trial one of the demo training module of a search and seizure and forensic investigation, we asked a couple of participants to seize a mobile phone and document everything. So what happened is they took the mobile phone, they flipped open the cover of the back, and they took out the battery, and they took out the SIM. And then later on we asked which SIM was there in which port, because it was dual SIM phone. They forgot, because which particular SIM was in which particular location. It's very easy to forget, because SIMs look alike. So the idea is, if you are doing video recording of everything at the crime scene, whatever activity you are doing, you are able to document them. Even if by accidentally something spills over or you are not able to recall, your videography of those search and seizure process will help you understand and record everything to the certainty that what was connected to what particular port or device. Right, you need to carry basic hardware toolkits like screwdrivers, duct tape to make sure that you secure everything. You have to have watertight, static resistant plastic evidence bag like a Faraday bag for mobile phones, which makes sure that mobile phone does not receive any communication. You must have AA, AAA batteries. You must have those connecting devices which can go into any kind of mobile phone. All kind of connectors of USB, like say Type C USB these days we are using. So all kind of old and modern phones connectors which can be used to supply electricity through the AAA and AA batteries, so that phones does not die, you should carry, because those are the scenarios which you will face once you reach at the crime scene. At the crime scene, if you don't have these connectors and ability to ensure that power is continued to mobile phone, mobile phone will go switch off after battery is drained, and that would be a scenario which is difficult to explain in court of law. Again, anti-static devices, because hard drives which you take out from which are open hard drives which are stored in almirahs, or let's say in an open computer which you have to take out, if you handle them directly, there are chances that those hard disks may not work. They will go bad, and they will no longer be having evidentiary value because of the static charge which you may be having and giving to these devices. So the idea is you should have anti-static bags in which you store hard drives or the evidence or the devices which are sensitive to static charges, and hence you can ensure that static charges don't go and don't destroy the evidentiary values. We may have to have bootable devices at times, though not highly recommended. It's only required in a very, very specific scenarios. We may also have to have capability to do on-site imaging or on-site memory extraction capabilities. The reason is some of the computing resources cannot be taken away to forensic lab. For example, a bank server where millions of customers are, accessing data of that bank from that computer, you cannot shut it down. Reason is, if you shut it down, the services of the banks will go down, and that will cause business to go down for that bank. So in that case, at times you have to do the live analysis of the RAM. You have to do the network analysis, network based imaging of the hard drives which are there probably in those hardware devices, and so on. So the idea is that some of these capabilities are required in a very specialized cases, and you must know when to use them and how to use them. You have to have laptop computers for tools and notes, because you might have to connect something. You have to have hardware write blockers, because when you are doing imaging, you need to make sure that you connect in a one-way fashion. So write blocker is a device which does not allow any information to go back. So let's say if I have to take a image of a hard drive, I will connect that hard drive to my laptop, which is having a forensic tool, through a write blocker, so that all that can happen in this case is I can extract information, read information from that hard drive to my computer, but I cannot write it to this device, this hard drive, which means there is no change in that hard drive, right? Once we have all these things, once we are doing search and seizure, we need to have, power strips to provide power, logbooks to record all the details, flashlights, because at times it might be dark. So basically, you need to prepare a very exhaustive toolkit when you are going for search and seizure. You need to have luggage cart or storage units which ensure that your whatever devices you are storing are safe, they don't move inside that, they are secure. While being transported, they do not have shocks, so they have to have shock proofers. So all these things need to be pre-identified, and we need to prepare as a part of our forensic toolkit when we go for search and seizure. Okay, so this is important because what happens is, as a criminal, they ensure that because criminals anticipate that sometime they will be searched. So while they are doing their criminal activities, they keep storing some of the artifacts, some of the devices in a fashion they are not easy to identify. So when a search and seizure is happening, there are hidden artifacts. So we must know that whatever is visible at the crime scene is not the only source of evidence. There could be hidden source of evidences, hidden artifacts or hidden devices. For example, we have seen in past, in some of the cases, a pen drive which is disguised as a stone in a fish tank. So what happens is, there is a stone which you roll, and from inside the stone there is a USB drive, and the stone, once you roll it up, it's a waterproof compartment. So there is a pen drive which is into a waterproof compartment, looks like a stone put into a fish tank. There are hard drives or USB drives which are put inside sofas, which is put inside AC ducts, which is put inside paintings, walls, and disguise basically. And those disguised items are very, very difficult to find. But then whenever you are going for a search and seizure, apart from normal devices which you can see, you must always look for disguised hidden artifacts. And when we talk about disguised artifacts, it's like watch is having a USB in the strap. There could be necklace which is having a USB drive. There could be pen which might be having a recorder and a pen drive. Right, so there are hundreds and thousands of type of disguised devices which may also which exist, which are used by criminals. They are their favorite, because at times a small miss by a search and seizure team can ensure that a lot of crucial evidences are saved for them. So criminals are expert in hiding devices and the artifacts in a disguised and at a hidden places, and we must ensure that we try to find it out. one important thing which I saw last year in a conference in United States of America, what they are doing is they are training dogs. They are training dogs, and what they are training them for is uh, uh, all the storage medias and the computing medias. They have chips, and those chips are having, any black chip which is there into onto a USB drive or a hard disk or into a DVR. All those storage chips are made up of a chemical which is known as TTPO, triphenyl phosphine oxide. So this is common to all storage chips today. So any storage chip, if it has to be made, TTPO is the chemical which has been used. So what they did is they trained some of the dogs in terms of detecting. So what they did is they gave this chemical for smelling to the dogs, and if they identified it, they gave them reward. And over a period of time, dog was trained to sniff out DTPO. Now what they are doing is, whenever there is a crime scene where search and seizure has to take place, a team of law enforcement agency goes there. They identify, they do the normal conventional search and seizure. They do the video recording of everything. They identify all the electronic device. They do the logging. They do the search and seizure, and they preserve them. They seal them, pack them, put them into luggage cart, take them away. Once they have completed their search and seizure, they have taken away all the devices which they could identify at the crime scene. What they do is, post that dog which has been trained is brought in, because if they bring the dog in first, they will get confused with all the existing devices, because every computing device is having that TTPO chemical, right? Once everything which is visible to the investigator has been taken away and the dog is brought in, then the dog can sniff those TTPO chemicals, and it can point, okay, there is something inside sofa, there is something inside fish tank, there is something inside, wherever it has been hidden. Because now only thing which is giving out TTPO is those devices, those artifacts, those computing medias which has been hidden. So this is turning out to be very crucial. Reason is, all those hidden devices, when identified or detected, are having highest chances and the biggest of, they are like the jackpot for the law enforcement agency, because all the artifacts are there. The device which has been hidden, it has been hidden for a purpose. And once they are hiding a device, basically, that is a gold mine of evidences against them, because in normal computer they don't have anything. So there was a case where a computer so a desktop was there, of which one side was open, and there was a hard drive connected to it. So what the criminal was doing is, because once after the search and seizure was done for that particular person, there was no evidences were found. What was found is that this computer is having a hard drive where a freshly installed Windows is there. There is no deleted data. This hard drive has not been used at all. The reason was, he was using one more hard drive which he used to connect for doing the criminal activity, and once the activities were done, he used to disconnect this hard drive, hide it in a place, and connect a blank hard drive which is only having a operating system installed, and he was not using this computer for any other activity. So these kind of things happen until you try to find out disguised and hidden devices. Most of the time you will get lot of information, but not the useful information. So disguised, hidden devices and artifact identification is very, very important, because criminals are smart and they are not conventional no voice criminals. They hide their traces. They try to hide the evidences. One important thing which I thought I'll discuss is, which is SOP for contaminated device handling. Not only because of COVID-19 pandemic, but also there might be scenarios where, where criminals might have exposed the electronic devices to some kind of contamination. Or there could be scenarios, let's say there is a some accident where we have some of the mobile phones seized. There is a blast site from where there were computing devices which were seized, and it will have human remains, it will have explosives, and it will have all sort of contamination. So we must also develop guidelines for handling contaminated devices. what all to do, who will do what. Reason is, if a contaminated device stained with blood and all other environmental contamination was seized by a search and seized by a law enforcement agency and packed into a plastic envelope and sent to forensic lab where its turn comes after 2 months, because of the blood, rusting will happen very fast. So lot of evidence, probably the device will stop responding, device will stop working, corrosion will happen. So we must know that how do we ensure such contaminated device is handled so that corrosion does not take place. Because of these reasons, evidentiary value do not go away. So we must plan contaminated device handling guidelines for search and seizure people, for forensic labs. We must also have, if there is a contaminated device, this information and fact should be highlighted clearly in chain of custody. The priority should be given to handle devices which are contaminated, or at least to handle them to a point so that the contamination of those devices is removed, so that they can be preserved for forensic investigation as and when the forensic investigation turn of those devices come. Right. Then one important thing which we have observed with the experience is, whenever you're going to a crime site, apart from the electronic device, you must also try to find out what is there in the waste baskets. There might be some partly printed papers. There might be some broken devices. There might be, very useful information in the waste which is there. So we call it, like criminal do dumpster diving for their benefit. Law enforcement agencies must also do dumpster diving for their benefit, because it can give them some useful information which may be useful for the forensic lab. There might be a small post-it yellow color chit which might be having username or password. There might be, SSIDs which have been noted somewhere. There might be, so anything and everything which is there which could be useful for forensic experts later on should be captured. In case of printer, let's say there is a printer and when search and seizing happened, so what happened, criminal tried to destroy things. So let's say there was some printing going on, criminal tried to destroy. Now what can happen is, you must always try to put paper in the paper tray of a printer and see if there is anything pending printing. Because what happens is, let's say if I gave 20 pages to be printed and printer only had 18 pages, so 18 pages will print and I will take away 18 pages. I may not be knowing that 2 pages are left. So in case you have a printer which is live, which is switched on, what you should do is, as a search and seizure party, you can always put fresh papers into the paper tray, and if there is anything to be printed which is there in the spool or the buffer of a printer, it will be printed for you. So this is also something could be useful, because a couple of pages come out, you will know what document was being used last and what are the content of that document. Right, so this is about search and seizure. This is about first responder. I may discuss one case study, but if you have questions, I would be happy to take questions on these two.
There are certain questions.
Yes, sir.
First question is relating to IT Act, Section 67 of IT Act is bailable or non-bailable. So Section 67 of IT Act, the offense that has been prescribed, that is bailable. It is bailable by virtue of Section 67B of the Information Technology Act, because it says that it makes a departure from the provisions of the CRPC. So there are many offenses which have been enumerated under the Information Technology Act, in which the punishment that has been prescribed is up to 3 years, but that has been made bailable. So this is a special act which overrides over the provisions of the CRPC. The second question is, screen savers installed in a computer needs relogin. Is it similar to shutdown of a computer? Mr. Akhilesh Kumar is asking this question.
Yeah, so Mr. Akhilesh, I think anything which is going on a computer you can't handle. Even if you try to handle the screen saver which is going on, there will be logs which will be generated onto the hard drive or through the operating system, and you need to explain all those things. So the ideally you should only take the photograph from the outside using a digital camera or a handy cam, and you should not handle it. You can probably take away the power and shut it down, and that should be the best scenario in that case.
Okay. Mr. Niranjan Nayak is asking, what are the tools available to download Facebook video and Facebook stories?
It has nothing to do with the first responder, right? So there are multiple things, like you can always ask Facebook to provide you this information as law enforcement agency.
Yeah. So I think as of now, we had only 3 questions. Yeah, there is one more question by Mr. Pradeep. In fact, he is appreciating the presentation. He writes, highly informative session, experience of the presenter clearly visible. Mr. Ashraf is also appreciating the session. And then Mr. Ranjan Kumar has also appreciated the session. So as of now, I don't see any other question.
Okay, so what I also wanted to show was NIST standards, which I will I think I will also share. It is downloadable from this website also. I can probably show once. Can I just show? Okay, I'll just stop sharing and reshare. Okay. Can you see it? So this is one such document. I'll just browse you through. So if you see here, they are talking about searching and seizing of all kind of computers. So this is, starting from very, very old computers to, what kind of hard drives are there, what all needs to be done, what kind of external hard drives are there, olden days floppy drives, 3.5-inch floppy drives to, CDs, various kinds of pen drives, disguised device. Like if you see here, it's a watch, and it's a multi-device, and it's lipstick or a pen. So they are showing here all kind of device, and they are also telling what kind of evidences could be there and how to preserve them. So searching and seizing, as well as preparing for these first responder, both needs to be treated in terms of making guidelines for the organization, making guidelines for the teams, and the roles and responsibility identified, and tools and preparation, what needs to be done while you are going to carry out first responder activities or search and seizure activities on site needs to be planned well. So you need to make a toolkit, you need to understand what all can you encounter there, and you need to then probably plan for it. You may also do some kind of drills where you can have a one room which is made as a crime scene, where a lot of hidden, disguised, as well as normal devices has been kept, and that can be used to train law enforcement agencies, where people have to go in and do a search and seizure activity in 1 hour, and where later on experts evaluate how did you do it, and based on that you can be trained as, okay, you are now trained for doing search and seizure, you are now trained for this particular activity, you are good, you are, let's say, you have basic information, you are advanced, and accordingly search and seizure teams can be made later on. The experts and the advanced people who have advanced knowledge can be made as the person responsible for carrying out searching and seizing, as well as doing the activities for investigation. So there are a lot of material which can be referred. I will be sharing this in due course of time with the team, which I think can share in turn to you as the participants can go through it and augment the knowledge. So fine, I think if there are any more questions, I will be happy to take
Yes,
them.
sir, I can see some more questions. Mr. Indresh Kumar, IODRI, he's asking, suppose I have two different printouts. So whether can we ascertain that these two printouts were taken from same printer or different printer?
For sure. So yeah, so this was actually part of my PhD thesis also. That was one of the things which I did. So each printer is printing, and the process is basically, I'll show you something. I think that will help you. That was a case study I thought I'll discuss. Okay. So, I was discussing about document fraud only. I did long back some work on detecting and fixing printer and scanner behind a counterfeit document. And the idea was that, people were making fake passes, stamp papers, and, documents like currency notes. Now demonetization has happened. Postal stamps, which nobody basically cares. Those were printed and scanned and printed. And registration certificates, mark sheets, licenses, bank checks. So anything and everything could be counterfeited, right? So what we did is, whatever these circles you are seeing, what we did is we magnified, because your microscope will have a limited aperture. So we selected some portion of it and we magnified this particular portion 40 to 60 times. And if you see here, this is original document. All four are fake, counterfeit, made by printers and scanners. So if you see dots and dots size in this case is bigger. On top two is very big. Both are from same printer, printer number one. If you see the density of these black dots inside the corrector, visible portion, it is less here, it is very less here, and very high in these two right side things. Reason is they are from different scanners. So each printer, each scanner has a very peculiar noise which is being incorporated into the printed document, because these printers and scanners has been made only for perfect for the naked eye. But when you see these things under microscope, lot of noise comes out, which is not visible to our naked eye. So if you have a piece of paper, let's say two pieces of paper, and you want to know whether they are from same printer or not, if you use specialized software, like we have made an automated system also for this, there is a software which can actually do it for you. Idea is you magnify them and give it to a software. It will quantify the noise, find out the patterns of the noise, and those patterns, if they are coming from the same printer, the patterns will be same, and if they are coming from different printer, the patterns will be different. So if you have 10, 20, 30, let's say if you have 10 printers and 10 scanners, and you have two documents, you can always find out which printer it is coming from. What you cannot do probably is, if you have a piece of paper and you ask me which printer in the world it has come from, probably I cannot answer. But if you have a finite set of printers and scanners, 5, 7, 10, from there you can always find it out.
There is another question by Mr. Bhaskar Saha. He's asking, if the screen of a seized mobile phone is not working, then how to access the screen of the mobile phone?
So in that case, let's say you are doing search and seizure, you should not do anything. At that point of time, you should only try to connect it to power, which is where the power source is AA or AAA batteries, and put it into Faraday bag and send it to the forensic lab, because they are equipped to connect it to the tools and then carry out the forensic investigation. As a search and seizure personnel, you should not do anything.
Mr. Brahmanand Jha is asking, what's the link for NIST document?
We'll send you the link and provide you the documents
Mr. KV Bhaskar has appreciated the session. He writes, thanks for the wonderful session. What are the precautions to be taken while acquiring data from cloud?
Okay, so cloud is something which is evolving. In case of cloud, there are a couple of things. One is what kind of SLA has been, taken into consideration with the party. So cloud provides you a lot of documentation. So what happens in case of cloud is SLA, let's say cloud service provider is keeping data as per the SLA which it has. So it also allows you to carry out some kind of forensic investigation. So if you can talk to the cloud service provider, they can allow you to run tools into the virtual machine, and up to an extent, depending on the SLAs which they have and what all they are keeping, you can actually extract data and you can get some of the some of the artifacts which have forensic value. But again, cloud forensics is something which is still developing, which is not fully mature, and there are certain loopholes and there are certain limitations which exist.
Yeah, there is a question by Ratna Prava Satpathy. In case of 2 printouts, can we send another 2 sample printouts of the same printer for examination?
Yes, definitely. So what happens is, let's say if I have two pieces of paper which are printed and I have 4 printers, I will print one sample each from those 4 printers and send along with these 2 printouts, so that expert can find out what is matching and can link up a question document as well as the sample document to a piece of printer.
There is a question by Mr. K. Gupta. He is asking, when a mobile phone is brought to lab and it's neither getting started, it is neither getting started nor getting charged, what to do?
So in that case, there are a couple of things which needs to be done. First is you try to open it up and you change the non-processing parts. Let's say you change the battery, or you take the core processing part and shift it to a new similar phone. So you can buy, let's say there is an XYZ model. I buy a new XYZ model and take out, I try to fit in the non-processing part of new one to the old one to make sure it works. And if nothing works, the only solution left is chip off, which means data which is stored onto the chips, those chips are taken off from the PCB, and then those are again connected to specialized connectors in a which we call as chip off using the connectors, and raw data is extracted, and then raw data is reconstructed using conventional carving technology. And once you have reconstructed it, you got the data. We have a couple of facilities in India where chip off facilities exist.
Mr. Rishi is asking, how can we obtain information from seized mobile phone which has been encrypted?
Okay, so encryption is a challenge. It is a challenge for all the countries. I think you must have read that FBI refused to unlock the iPhone which a terrorist was using. So that is what criminals do. They use the latest technology at times, and let's say if somebody is using iPhone 12 today, you cannot decrypt it. So if it is high level encryption, you need cooperation of the user. That is one, or else it is very difficult.
Yeah, Mr. Vinod Sharma has appreciated this session. I think we don't have any other question. So with this, I would like to thank you, sir. And now I invite Mr. Rao to formally propose vote of thanks to the resource person of today. Over to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Gaurav sir, for taking a wonderful session. I know you always make everyone happy with your knowledge, and I'm having known you in the ministry with your knowledge in digital forensics. Thank you very much for making time. On behalf of National E-Governance Division and National NLIU Bhopal, I thank you for taking this session. We also request you spare much more time, take some more sessions and informative and enriching sessions to our participants. We thank you for this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.